Clarity over complexity builds real wealth over time. So I'm here to change your future from the Real Book Studio. This is the Matt Money Show. So why do we have an emergency fund? Like who created that idea? What's this pocket of savings I have to build up? And it is going to grow at a low interest rate almost always, if anything. Some people, it's just in a cash checking, I don't know, or like your Fifth Third account. I used to have a Fifth Third account that paid me some like insultingly low interest rate. I don't even know how to say how much I made, but I had my emergency fund there, and it'd be like, I don't know, I had maybe like $5,000 in there. It wasn't as much as it should have been, but I would get 2 pennies a month. Like, I don't know. But why do we have an emergency fund? What is this idea? Who invented this? I want to start investing. I want to grow my wealth. But the emergency fund, the real answer here is that it is to keep you out of debt when life happens. So emergencies, when they do come up, they can be expensive. You can probably think of some from your own life. A medical emergency, maybe you're a homeowner and your HVAC went out, car breaks down, stuff, whatever it may be that comes up. It is already expensive. I remember when I bought my first house in Nashville, and it's actually a pretty funny story. I was renting out the extra rooms in order to help cover the mortgage. For those of you in the real estate world, this is house hacking. And I was taking the idea of an emergency fund really seriously. And because I knew that when I'm investing in real estate, I'm taking on somewhat of a risky position. And at the time, if I didn't have these renters, this mortgage would have been a decent amount of my take-home pay. So it would have made budgeting overall more difficult. It was probably 40 or so % of my take-home pay, at least. And so I made sure to put a lot of money aside so that I'd have, money for when something inevitably went wrong, or as I quoted earlier, when life happens. And the reason it's a funny story is that first summer, we turn on the HVAC and we're having air conditioning blow. Everyone's comfortable. Everyone's feeling good. And it goes out. So I'm like, I just bought this house. I've already got the HVAC blown. So I have the guy come over and I'm like, how much, is it going to be to replace, or what's the cost basically? I don't care what you do, fix it, replace it, but like, what am I in for? And it was like $3,300 all said, new unit. Hey, I've got tenants in there. So it's like, I want to install this week and I need to have payment ready to go. And I was like genuinely excited about paying $3,300 for an HVAC only because I was already prepared for that expense. Now, let's imagine the contrary, because I probably shouldn't have been excited about it. I was just excited to see that the concept of an emergency fund works. But let's move to the other scenario. Let's say I didn't prepare. So instead, this is going to be the Matt that chose to, where should I go? I'm going to go, the Matt that chose to go to Japan on my emergency fund monies. And that would be really cool. Don't get me wrong. It's one of my dream travel locations. But let's say I went ahead and did that, jumped the gun. And even though I just bought this brand new house, I'm sure nothing will go wrong. And then boom, HVAC blows. Okay. Well, now if I really don't have the cash for that, most likely I'm financing this in some way, either with that company that sells the HVAC. I've heard some really horrible stories about HVAC leasing. That is like a new concept. I'll have to do some homework on that. Or I'm paying for it on a credit card and then making monthly payments at super high interest rates, 16, 20% interest rates. And so now my already $3,300 expense becomes like a $4,500 or $5,000 expense after all that interest. And it robs me of my peace because over the months I'm paying this off every month. There it is again. Oh, remember that emergency? So let's go one step further. Imagine for people who have just been unfortunate and we haven't saved up any sort of emergency fund, and it's not just one issue. It's 5 that have compounded. And now we're making these monthly payments. And so you can see where I'm going with this idea that the emergency fund is extremely important for preserving your wealth and keeping things off of the credit card, off of the monthly payment plans, and instead being able to handle them on your own. So the real question becomes, how much do I set aside for these emergencies? Because as I mentioned in my stories before, sometimes it's $1,000, $3,300 was my HVAC. But for those of us who are just on an unlucky streak, it's 5 big things in a row. And how do I handle this? Or how do I be truly prepared? So there's a simple way to calculate your emergency funds. And we're not going to use a spreadsheet. We're not going to get on the budgeting app. So we're just going to use a simple rule. If you're single and you have no house, then we'll do 3 months of spending. So don't include your investing. Don't include 3 months of income. Just go to spending per month times 3. That's what we want to get to. And then from there, we can move on and save for retirement, and also, save for other wealth building priorities that you may have. Now, I put an asterisk on this because there are 2 scenarios where I would require a 6-month emergency fund. One is if you're a homeowner, and the other is if you have kids. So why? Why do I want you to increase your emergency fund if you are a homeowner or if you have kids? Well, I'll start with owning the house. It literally ties back to my earlier example. If you're a homeowner, you have a lot of fixed costs. So these are things we can easily budget for. You have a mortgage or rent, or sorry, you wouldn't have rent. You're a homeowner. You have a mortgage. You have property taxes. You have insurance. And the thing that people don't always think about when it comes to owning a home are those variable costs. So repairs and maintenance, HOA assessments, which would be your homeowners association has decided everyone in the association owes $2,000 because we're going to upgrade the main area, or we're going to upgrade everyone's sidewalk, or whatever it is. And so now you're on the hook for that. And so that's where people get caught up. And so because of home ownership, we have got to make sure that we set aside that extra 3 months of spending, because you just have more likelihood of emergencies popping up, honestly, when you're a homeowner. I remember renting, and sometimes I think back on it with fond memories because the HVAC would go out when I was renting, and I just put in a maintenance request, and later that day it was fixed. And I had a good maintenance team, I guess. They were doing work really quickly. But you just legitimately have more possible expenses that will come up. Now, what about the kids situation? So with kids, what it really comes down to is that more people are relying on you for their survival, the kids. And so because you're responsible for more people, you are also increasing the likelihood that you may have unexpected expenses. And so in both scenarios, I see that is much more prudent to have the 6-month emergency fund. But if you're single, or even if you're married, but you don't yet have kids, you're fine on a 3-month emergency fund. The only time that number ticks up is under one or both of the scenarios, the home and the kids. Once one of them is entered into the equation, it's time to bump the emergency fund up to 6 months. And you would want to do that for your kids, right? The house is an inanimate object, and it's, when you first own the home, sometimes you're getting away with it. But eventually you're going to realize, 6 months of emergency fund because something's going to go wrong in this thing. But the kids, you want to make sure that you're prepared for them. You just never know what's going to come up. So if you have an emergency fund already, or sometimes people have funds sitting in their checking account or their savings account with no plan, then you're ahead. Congratulations. You might just be able to easily move money and call it an emergency fund and you're done. But I want to make sure that you know where to store your emergency fund. And so what I would recommend is using a high yield savings account that allows you to title each category so that you can have a category called emergency fund. And you'll know you're fully funded when you take 3 months of your expense and that number is represented in that category. If you ever pull it out, then you're just going to be saving up to replenish in a future month. But now we're making payments to ourselves instead of to the credit card or to the monthly payment bank. Now, if you're interested, we do have a Wealthfront link in bio. It provides a 0.5% APY boost. So if you're like, ooh, I like the idea of an emergency fund in a high yield savings account, you can simply go to @TheMattMoneyShow on Instagram, click the link in bio, and it'll take you to where you can get set up and get a little bit of an extra percentage boost. Last thing I will say on a high yield savings account, not on an emergency fund, is with the high yield savings, they are going to be adjusting those interest rates based on what the Federal Reserve does. Now, there's really no point in getting into all the nitty gritty of that, but I want to set your expectations that interest rates will go up and down over time. The reason we're using a high yield savings is not because we're trying to beat the market or get the highest possible interest rate, but because we want to get something that's respectable, where the big banks truly have just disrespected the average customer with these 1 penny per month interest rates. That's really it. Please do not go into Wealthfront and get your 3.75% or whatever, and then you see Ally Bank is giving 4%, so you move your money there, and then everyone drops, and so then you go back to Wealthfront because they didn't drop as far. This is ridiculous. Pick one that works for you. It doesn't have to be Wealthfront, and keep your money there. Unless they ever change their policy to be more like Chase Bank or whoever, and they want to pay you a penny a month, then just leave the money in there. 3%, 4%, whatever you get is fine. Now, I always leave you with an action item. So my plan is, or my action item for you is to set up a plan to have a fully funded emergency fund. If you are still paying off debt, this may be a longer term goal. If you are debt free, except for a mortgage, then I want you to be fully funded this year. I want you to find a way in your budget to be able to set aside enough money to where by Christmas of this year, we've got a fully funded emergency fund. Merry Christmas.